Judson Pryor stared at the woman standing in his doorway. Her shadow stretched across the worn wooden floorboards, long and dark, like a promise someone was about to break. She was tall, nearly 7 feet, and made his small cabin feel like a dollhouse. But it wasn't her height that made the blood in his veins turn to ice. It was the way she knew, without asking, exactly where he kept his coffee tin. "I'm carrying your baby," she said. Her voice was steady as a mountain. Her pale eyes locked on his, searching for something he couldn't find in himself. His mind was a whirlwind of fractured memories, trying to catch a single image of her face, but there was nothing. He saw the scar on her left hand, a mirror image of the one on his own right. He saw the faded blue ribbon in her dark hair, the same color as the one he'd lost months ago, the one that had belonged to his mother. She said his name, Judson, like she had whispered it 1,000 times into a pillow in the dark, but he had never ever seen this woman before in his life. "Ma'am," he managed to say, his voice cracking like dry wood. "I think you've got the wrong man. I've never—" "The night of the storm," she cut him off, taking a step inside. Her presence filled the room. "You told me your mother's name was Ruth. You have a birthmark on your shoulder shaped like a crescent moon. You talk in your sleep about a horse named Thunder." Every word was a punch to the gut. No stranger could know these things. Nobody alive knew about Thunder. "That's impossible," he whispered. Her hand went to her belly, still flat beneath the worn fabric of her dress. 3 months along, due to come spring. She tilted her head, her gaze so intense it felt like she was peeling back layers of his skin to see what was underneath. "You really don't remember, do you?" The question hung in the air between them, thick and heavy like smoke from a wet fire. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the loose boards on his fence. The same fence he'd been meaning to fix for months. The thought felt important, but it vanished before he could grab it. "Remember what?" he asked, but a cold dread was already coiling in his stomach. He knew he didn't want the answer. The silence stretched on, taut and ready to snap. His hands trembled as he gripped the doorframe, his knuckles turning white. The woman stood perfectly still, a statue of patience, as if she could wait forever for his broken memory to put itself back together. "I need to sit down," he said, finally stepping back. His own home suddenly felt like a stranger's house, contaminated by her and the impossible truths she carried. Leora followed him in without an invitation. Her boots made no sound on the creaking floor. She moved through his cabin like she'd lived there her whole life, stepping over the loose board by the window he always tripped on, ducking her head just enough to avoid the low-hanging beam that had bruised his forehead more times than he could count. Her familiarity with his space made his skin crawl. "You kept the quilt," she said, her voice soft. She nodded toward the faded patchwork on his bed. "The one with the yellow roses." Judson spun around, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. "How could you possibly know about that? That was my grandmother's. I've never shown it to anyone." "You wrapped me in it," Leora said quietly. "You said it smelled like home and honey cakes." Her pale eyes softened for a moment, and he saw a flicker of vulnerability under her stone-like composure. "You were shaking that night, cold down to your bones." The words hit something deep inside him. He felt a phantom sensation, a memory of desperate warmth, of pressing his body against someone else's, sharing heat against a bitter cold. But the face was still a blur, a frustrating shadow in his mind. "The storm," he whispered. "You mentioned a storm." 3 months ago," she said, moving closer until her towering frame cast him in shadow. "Worst one in 20 years, trees down everywhere. The creek swelled so high it almost took the bridge." She paused, her eyes searching his. "You found me on the road, soaked through, half dead from the cold." Judson pressed the palms of his hands against his temples, trying to squeeze a memory out. The storm, yes, he remembered the storm. He'd lost 2 chickens, and a whole section of his roof had peeled off like a tin can lid. But the rest of it was a thick, gray fog. I don't remember finding anyone, he said, his teeth clenched. I would remember a woman like you. Would you? Her voice was laced with a sadness that cut right through him. Or would you choose to forget, like you chose to forget everything else that happened that night? The words were an accusation. Choose to forget. He'd never chosen to forget a thing in his life. His memory was a tool, sharp and reliable. Or it used to be. What happened to me? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Leora's hand rested on her flat stomach, and for the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed her face. That's what I came here to find out. Judson stumbled back, the rough wood of the cabin wall pressing into his shoulders. The room was shrinking, the walls closing in. He felt like a cornered animal. Leora watched him with those pale, all-knowing eyes, and he realized with a jolt of fear that she wasn't just waiting for him to remember. She was watching him like a hunter watches a wounded animal, trying to see if it's too hurt to be a threat. You're lying, he said, his voice thin with desperation. This is a trick. I would never forget meeting someone like you. He gestured helplessly at her height, her striking face. Someone like me? Leora's jaw tightened, a muscle flexing in her cheek. You mean someone too big? Too different? Someone who doesn't fit in your neat little world? That's not what I meant, he insisted. Then what did you mean, Judson? The way she said his name was like a key turning in a lock deep inside his chest. It felt right coming from her. It felt earned. But that was crazy. He was a loner. He kept to himself. He would have remembered her. He had to. I meant, he said, the words coming out quiet and raw, someone I couldn't forget, even if I wanted to. The anger in her face melted away, replaced by something much softer and 1,000 times more dangerous. You said that before, she whispered. The morning after the storm. You thought I was still asleep. You stood by the window watching the sun come up, and you said you'd never be able to forget me. The image slammed into his mind with the force of a physical blow. Standing at that very window, coffee growing cold in his hand, watching the dawn spill over the valley. And he remembered the feeling that came after. A profound, aching emptiness. A sense of loss that had clung to him for weeks. He'd blamed it on the storm, the stress of the repairs. But now he knew. It wasn't something that was missing. It was someone. Why can't I remember your face? He asked, his voice breaking. I remember feeling empty, but I can't see you there. Leora moved to his small table and pulled out a chair. The wood groaned under her weight as she sat down, the first time she had stopped moving since she arrived. She looked tired, her shoulders slumped. You hit your head that night, she said, her fingers tracing the scars on the tabletop. Fell hard trying to get the horses into the corral. You came back to the cabin bleeding, barely able to stand up. The memory hit him like lightning, a blinding flash of pain exploding in his skull, the metallic taste of blood filling his mouth, stumbling through the driving rain, the world tilting sideways. He unconsciously raised a hand to the back of his head, his fingers finding the tender, familiar scar he'd never been able to explain. I remember falling, he breathed, but I thought I was alone. You weren't alone. Leora's voice was heavy with a grief that twisted his stomach into a knot. I stayed with you, cleaned the wound, made sure you didn't slip away in your sleep. She paused, her eyes looking at something far away. And when you woke up the next morning. What happened when I woke up? He pressed, needing to know. She stood up so fast her chair scraped loudly against the floor. You looked right through me, she said, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Like I was a ghost. You didn't know my name. Didn't remember telling me about your dreams, your fears. You didn't remember holding me while the whole world tried to tear itself apart outside. The words were like shards of ice in his gut. And now you're carrying my child, he said, the reality of it finally crashing down on him. A child, created with a woman he couldn't remember, from a night he couldn't recall.
A child who was the only thing either of them had left of that time. The thought was too big, too heavy. He sank into the other chair, his legs suddenly weak. His child, growing inside a woman whose touch was a phantom limb, an ache he couldn't place. "Show me," he said, his voice quiet. Leora's eyebrows arched. "Show you what?" "The night," he said, gesturing around the cabin, his hands shaking. "Walk me through it. You know this place. Start from the beginning. Maybe if I see it through your eyes, I'll remember." For a long moment she just looked at him, her pale eyes searching his face. Then she gave a slow, deliberate nod. She walked to the door, her back straight and tall. "It started with thunder," she said. The name hit him again, harder this time. His horse. The best horse he'd ever owned. The one he'd lost in the storm. The grief had been a raw, open wound.
He'd never understood why the loss of one animal had carved such a deep hole in his soul. "You remember him?" Leora asked, watching his reaction like a hawk. "He broke his leg," Judson's voice cracked. "Slipped in the mud in the corral. I had to put him down the next morning." He swallowed hard. "But I don't remember how it happened." "He was trying to protect me," Leora said. She stood by the window, a tall silhouette against the fading afternoon light. "When you found me on the road, I was running from something. Thunder sensed the danger long before either of us did." "Running from what?" Her reflection in the glass was haunted. "My husband." The words dropped into the room and shattered the silence. A husband. A married woman. He'd taken a married woman into his home, into his bed. He'd made a child with a woman who belonged to another man. A cold, sick feeling washed over him. "You were married," he said, the words tasting like ash. "I was," Leora said, turning to face him. Her eyes were hard now, like chips of flint. "To a man who used his fists more than his words. A man who thought my height gave him the right to try and cut me down to size." Her hand drifted unconsciously to her ribs, and in that small movement he saw years of hidden fear. "Where is he now?" "That's what I've been trying to figure out," she said, stepping closer, her presence once again dominating the small room. "He followed me that night, Judson, out into the storm. I could hear his voice on the wind, calling for me, threatening what he would do when he found me." A flicker of memory ignited in the fog of Judson's mind. A man's voice, not just angry, but filled with a venomous rage, cutting through the roar of the wind and rain. And with it came another feeling, a surge of pure, protective fury rising in his own chest. The absolute bone-deep certainty that he would die before he let anyone harm the woman who was sheltering under his roof. "I remember anger," he said slowly, the feeling of it returning to him, fresh and raw. A clean, white-hot anger, like nothing I'd ever felt before. "You stood between us," Leora whispered. "Even with your head bleeding. You put yourself between me and the door. You told him you'd kill him before you let him lay a hand on me." The memory crashed over him then, a full sensory wave. The solid weight of his rifle in his hands. The feeling of Leora's body pressed against his back. Her fear a living thing in the dark cabin. The sound of boots crunching in the mud outside, circling, testing the door, testing the windows. "He was here," Judson breathed. "All night," Leora confirmed, her voice grim. "Waiting, watching, and when the morning came—" She stopped, her face going pale. "What happened in the morning, Leora?" "That's when I knew I had to leave," she said, but her eyes wouldn't meet his. "That's when I knew that staying would get us both killed." The color drained from Judson's face. "You left to protect me." "I left to protect us both," she corrected, but there was no conviction in her voice. "Marcus would never stop hunting me, and every day I stayed here put you in more danger." Marcus. The name was poison on his tongue. "Your husband's name was Marcus." Leora said quietly. "His name is Marcus." The present tense was a sledgehammer to the chest. He's still alive. Leora moved to his small kitchen counter, her nervous energy needing an outlet. She started arranging his coffee tin and sugar bowl, her movements practiced, efficient. Another piece of a puzzle that didn't make sense. "I thought I'd killed him that night," she said. The words were flat, matter-of-fact, but he heard the tremor beneath them. He rose from his chair, his body moving on its own until he was standing right behind her. So close he could smell the faint scent of lavender soap in her dark hair. So close he could feel the tension radiating off her like heat. "What happened?" "He broke in," she said, her hand stilling. "Through the back window. You were unconscious. The bleeding from your head had gotten worse and you kept drifting in and out. I was trying to keep you awake, trying to keep you talking, and then I heard the glass break." Fragments of memory assaulted him, the throbbing pain behind his eyes, a woman's voice calling his name, desperate, the taste of blood and copper, and under it all, a rage so pure and powerful it burned everything else away. "I remember getting up," he said, the words slow and deliberate. "The room was spinning, but I remember reaching for something." "The fireplace poker," Leora confirmed. "You could barely stand, but you wouldn't let me face him alone." "But I did let you face him alone, didn't I?" Judson's voice was soft, a terrible understanding dawning on him. "Because I passed out again." Leora nodded, her shoulders rigid. "He came at me with a knife. He said he'd rather see me dead than with another man. He said he'd carve the baby right out of me after he was finished with you." "You didn't know you were pregnant then?" "No," Leora said, turning to face him. Judson saw something broken deep in her pale eyes. "But he did. He'd been tracking my cycles, watching for signs. He said he wanted to be sure I could never give another man what belonged to him." The casual, calculated cruelty of it made Judson's stomach heave. "How did you stop him?" "The poker," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "The one you tried to reach. He was so focused on you, on getting to you while you were helpless on the floor. He never saw me pick it up. I hit him. Once, as hard as I could." She wrapped her arms around herself, as if warding off a chill. "He went down, and he didn't get back up. You thought he was dead." "There was so much blood," she said, her voice shaking now. "I waited until dawn. He never moved, never took a breath, so I dragged him out back. I buried him in the old abandoned well behind your property, and I left before you woke up." Judson felt the floor drop out from under him. The old well. The one he'd been meaning to clear out for months. "The same one," Leora said, meeting his eyes, "except when I went back there yesterday just to make sure everything was still hidden. I found something." "What did you find?" Her voice was barely a whisper, but the words hit him like a physical blow. "The well was empty, Judson, and there were fresh tracks leading away from it." The silence in the cabin was absolute, a crushing weight that stole the air from his lungs. The world he thought he knew tilted on its axis. Every assumption, every half-formed memory of the last 3 months crumbled into dust. Marcus was alive. The man who had terrorized Leora, who had broken into his home, who had threatened to kill them both, was out there, somewhere in the wilderness, and he knew exactly where to find them. "How old were the tracks?" Judson asked, his voice low and steady as he moved toward the rifle mounted over his fireplace. "Fresh," Leora said, watching him. "Maybe hours." She watched as he took the rifle down, his hands moving with a practiced familiarity that seemed to surprise even her. He broke it open, checking the ammunition. "You remember how to use that?" she asked. "Some things," he said, loading the rifle with steady hands, muscle memory overriding the fog in his mind. "You don't forget." He snapped the rifle shut. "We need to leave. Now." "Where would we go?" she asked, her voice laced with despair. "He'll track us. He's good at it. He'll hunt us wherever we run." "Then we don't run," Judson said. He met her eyes and she saw something in them she hadn't seen before. Something hard and cold and dangerous. "We end this." Leora shook her head, a flicker of the old fear returning to her eyes. "You don't understand him, Judson. He isn't just violent. He's clever. He's patient. He's probably been planning this for months, watching us. The thought made Judson's skin crawl. How many nights had Marcus been out there, hiding in the darkness just beyond the tree line, watching the light in the cabin window, healing from a wound that should have killed him, nursing his hatred, planning his revenge. "Let him come," Judson said, the venom in his own voice surprising him. "I should have finished the job that night." "You were half dead," Leora insisted, moving closer, her hand brushing his arm. The simple contact was like a lightning strike, sending a jolt through his entire body, awakening feelings that were both brand new and anciently familiar. "I remember more now," he said quietly, his voice rough. "I remember the way you felt in my arms, the promises we made to each other in the dark, with the storm raging outside." Leora's breath hitched. "Judson." "I promised to protect you," he said, his free hand coming up to cup her face, his thumb gently tracing the line of her cheekbone. "I promised to keep you safe no matter what it cost me. I might not remember every detail, but I remember that." She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing for a brief moment. Those promises were made by a man who didn't know what he was getting into. "They were made by a man who had just found something worth fighting for," Judson said, his voice thick with emotion. "Something worth dying for." And that's when they heard it. The sound of a horse's hooves on hard-packed earth, distant but unmistakable, cutting through the afternoon quiet. They both froze, their eyes locking in a moment of shared primal terror. "He's here," Leora whispered. Judson pulled her against him, shielding her with his body. He could feel her heart hammering against his chest. She was so tall, her forehead nearly touching his chin, but in that moment, she felt impossibly fragile. The woman who had faced down her monstrous husband with nothing but a fireplace poker was trembling in his arms. "Listen to me," he said, his voice urgent and low. "There's a root cellar out back, hidden under the old tarp. You go there. You stay there until this is over." "No," she said, her voice fierce. "I won't hide while you face him alone." "You're carrying my child," he said, the words full of a fierce, possessive power. "Our child. That changes everything." The hoofbeats grew closer, slower now, and then they heard his voice, a lazy, mocking drawl that carried through the trees. "Leora, I know you're in there, wife. Come on out. If you do, I might just let your lover live long enough to watch." The voice was poison, each word a carefully crafted barb meant to wound and terrify. Judson felt Leora flinch, her body going rigid with remembered trauma. "3 months I've been healing, wife," Marcus called out, his voice circling the cabin like a vulture. 3 long months, just thinking about all the things I'm going to do to you, to both of you. Did you really think a little love tap like that would keep me down for good?" Judson pressed his lips to Leora's ear, his voice barely a whisper. "The cellar. Now." She shook her head, stubborn. "He'll kill you the second I'm out of his sight." "Then we both stay," Judson said, his gaze sweeping the cabin, his mind calculating angles and cover. "And we fight." He had 12 shots. He prayed it would be enough. "I've got something for you, Judson," Marcus shouted, his tone shifting to one of mock friendliness. "A little something I dug up from that old well. You want to see what your precious horse thunder looks like after 3 months in the ground?" The taunt hit its mark. A blinding, white-hot rage washed over Judson, and in that instant the fog in his mind burned away completely. The final pieces of that night slammed into place, not as fractured images, but as a crystal-clear, continuous memory. He remembered Thunder's eyes, wide with pain and trust as he lay in the mud. He remembered the gentle way Leora had held the horse's head, whispering to him, while Judson did what had to be done. He remembered them digging the grave together in the pre-dawn light, their tears mixing with the rain. "You remember," Leora breathed, seeing the change in his eyes. "I remember everything," Judson said, his voice deadly calm. The rage was still there, but now it was compressed, focused into a cold, hard point. "I remember how he screamed when you hit him. I remember the sound his skull made when it cracked against the floor. He's trying to make you angry, Leora warned. To make you reckless. No, Judson said, moving to the window, keeping himself shielded by the frame. He's trying to draw me outside, but he's about to find out I'm not the same man he fought 3 months ago. Marcus laughed, a harsh grating sound that scraped against the cabin walls. Come on out, Judson. Let's finish this. Man to man. Leave my wife out of it. I am not your wife, Leora shouted, her voice ringing with a strength Judson had never heard before. I stopped being your wife the first time you raised your hand to me. The response was immediate, vicious. You'll always be mine, you freak. No decent man wants a woman who towers over him like a circus act. But this fool here, he doesn't know what you really are, does he? Judson felt Leora tense beside him, the old wounds torn open by Marcus's practiced cruelty. He reached for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers, a silent anchor in the storm. He's wrong, Judson said, his voice loud enough for Marcus to hear clearly. She's perfect, exactly as she is. The silence that followed was more menacing than the taunts. When Marcus spoke again, the mocking tone was gone, replaced by something flat and murderous. Have it your way, but I'm not leaving without her, and I'm not leaving either of you breathing. The first shot shattered the front window, glass exploding across the cabin floor. Judson pulled Leora down behind the heavy oak table just as a second shot splintered the window frame right where his head had been. The sound of hoofbeats thundered as Marcus circled the cabin, using his horse as a moving shield, firing from the saddle. He's trying to flush us out, Judson said, his voice tight. Force us into the open. Another shot tore through the thin wall of the cabin, the bullet whining past Judson's ear. Marcus was getting closer, his aim getting better. The back window, Leora whispered urgently. I can slip out while he's focused on the front. Get behind him. Absolutely not! Judson's grip on her hand tightened. You're not risking yourself or this baby! Then what's the plan, Judson? We wait here until he burns us out? As if her words had summoned it, the sharp, acrid smell of smoke began to curl through the walls. He'd set the woodpile ablaze, the one Judson had stacked against the east wall. Fire, Judson muttered, his mind racing. He's going to smoke us out like rats. The dry timbers of the cabin caught fast. The heat was building, the air growing thick and hard to breathe. In minutes, they would have to choose, burn alive inside or face Marcus's rifle outside. There's another way, Leora said suddenly, her eyes bright with a desperate idea. The root cellar. You were right. But it connects to something else, an old mine shaft. It runs under the property. We could come up behind him. Judson stared at her. You never told me about a mine shaft. You were unconscious most of the night, she said simply. I explored while I was keeping watch. Smoke was pouring into the cabin now, making their eyes stream, making them cough. The tunnel comes out by the creek, 50 yards behind his last position. Another shot tore through the cabin. Marcus was getting impatient. Can you make it through there? In your condition? A grim, humorless laugh escaped Leora's lips. Judson, I made it through 3 months of hell carrying this child. I can make it through a tunnel. A section of the roof suddenly groaned and crashed inward, sending a shower of sparks across the floor. The decision was made. The cellar, Judson said, grabbing his rifle and the extra ammunition. We stay together, no matter what. He pulled up the concealed trapdoor as Marcus's voice echoed through the roar of the fire. It's getting hot in there, isn't it, wife? Come on out. I'll make it quick for you. Judson helped Leora down into the cool darkness, then followed, pulling the heavy door shut above them, just as the flames began to lick across the cabin floor. The tunnel was cramped and smelled of damp earth, but it was their only chance. How far? He whispered, his voice swallowed by the dark. 50 yards feels like 50 miles when you're crawling on your hands and knees, Leora whispered back. But it's better than burning. Above them, they could hear Marcus's heavy boots stomping across the cabin floor, followed by a furious, muffled shout as he discovered their escape. He knows, Judson breathed. We have maybe 5 minutes before he figures out where this leads. They scrambled through the darkness, choking on dust, the faint current of fresh air their only guide. They burst out of the tunnel's mouth behind a thicket of overgrown brush, gasping for clean air. In the distance, Judson's cabin was an inferno, black smoke billowing into the sky. Marcus's horse was still there, tied to the fence post, but Marcus himself was gone. He's inside, Leora breathed, looking for the other end of the tunnel. Judson checked his rifle. He looked at Leora. Her face was streaked with dirt, her hair a wild tangle, but her pale eyes were filled with a fierce, unwavering resolve. "When I give the signal," he said, his voice low, "you head for the creek. Don't stop running." "No," she said, her voice like steel. "We finish this together." Before he could argue, Marcus appeared in the burning doorway of the cabin. His face was a mask of pure fury as he saw them. "There!" he roared, raising his rifle. "Thought you were clever, didn't you?" Judson shoved Leora behind the cover of a massive fallen log as Marcus's first shot ripped through the air, going wide. Marcus was advancing, using the trees for cover, closing the distance. "I need you to trust me," Judson said, his voice urgent. "When I make my move, you run. Don't look back." He turned to her, his eyes full of everything he couldn't say. "I remember everything now, Leora, including how much I love you." He pressed a quick, hard kiss to her lips. "Our child deserves a life without fear." And with that, Judson rose from behind the log, his rifle at his shoulder, deliberately drawing Marcus's attention. Another shot rang out, kicking up dirt just to his left. But in that split second, as Marcus worked the bolt on his rifle to reload, Judson saw his chance. The distance was 60 yards, a hard shot, but not impossible. Judson took a steadying breath, let half of it out, and gently squeezed the trigger. Marcus dropped like a puppet with its strings cut. His rifle flew from his hands, landing silently in the tall grass. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the crackle and roar of the fire consuming what was left of Judson's home. After a long, breathless moment, Leora stepped out from behind the log, her eyes fixed on the still form in the distance. "Is he—" "He's dead," Judson said, his voice certain. He kept his rifle trained on the body, just to be sure. It was over. 6 months later, Judson nailed the last board into the wall of their new cabin. It was smaller than the old one, but it was sturdy and built closer to town. He could see Leora sitting in the shade of a large oak tree, their newborn daughter sleeping peacefully in her arms. He walked over, wiping the sweat from his brow, and sat down beside her. "She has your eyes," Leora said softly, looking down at the baby. Judson smiled, reaching out to gently touch the baby's tiny hand. "And your strength," he said. "She's going to be extraordinary." "Like her parents," Leora replied, her free hand finding his, their fingers lacing together, a matching scar on each, a permanent reminder of the storm that had almost torn them apart but had brought them together instead. "Like her parents," Judson agreed, his heart full. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales of survival and redemption. Your support means everything to us and helps us keep these stories coming. Click the video on your screen now for another story you won't want to miss.